Have you ever wondered what your dreams mean? Join us in Dream School at thisjungianlife.com and find out. Jung wrote, "Dreams are a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul."
Dream School is a unique, self-paced online program you can start at any time that unlocks access to your inner world. Our 12-month program provides the support, knowledge, and guidance you need to reach within, decipher your personal dream code, and harness it to optimize your life. By enrolling, you'll join an affirming community of fellow travelers, each pursuing a unique quest.
And it's fun. Join us on an adventure to wholeness and healing through understanding your dreams. Go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Dream School. You'll be taken to our secure checkout. Once you join, you'll get immediate access to our first 3 modules. You can get started right away. We look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
Today we're going to talk about falling in love. There's many different dimensions of love. The Greek philosophers opined greatly on the greatest good of love and friendship and the best of human nature. All kinds of books, all kinds of podcasts, all kinds of movie themes deal with falling in love. I think in the current culture, falling in love is overvalued in a lot of ways. People spend a lot of time when they're young pursuing love relationships and idealizing them in a great, powerful way. And Jung was very interested in this phenomena of love and of falling in love. Certainly in Swiss society and the culture that he was born into and raised in, had a very kind of temperate, traditionally framed understanding of love and marriage and the trajectory of a couple. As part of Jung's individuation process and his internal revelations, he discovered that his drive to love stepped outside of what was considered normative behaviors for that time. He found himself passionately in love with various women in his lives, sometimes his analysts. And in his drive to understand that, the transformative and sometimes crucifying effect of being in love became part of his psychology and found a rooting in his alchemical work. Freud, I think, famously talked about psychoanalysis as the love cure, that there's something about the intimacy and unbounded feeling between two people when it's held in the right container that can facilitate individuation and a soulful growth, but it comes at a price. And so we hold that paradox of wanting to be deeply in love, being torn apart by love itself, and hoping that we will be reconfigured in a way that we are better than we were before. And so we're going to talk about falling in love.
Yeah, Joseph, that's a great overview of our topic today. I just want to pick up on one thing you said. You said that you think that maybe we overvalue falling in love in our culture. And I think you're right, but maybe I would amend it and say that we value it incorrectly. It is so tremendously transportative and important to fall in love. But then what meaning do we make of it? Because I think we tend to evaluate it very concretely in our culture. That because I fell in love with that person, that means that we're supposed to be together forever and ever. And that ought to become the focus of my life, is out there in that other person, instead of wondering what about that experience, what does that tell me or show me or help me understand about my inner world?
I think Jung would agree with you. I think that particularly in his Black Books and the Red Book, he comes to a really eloquent place about the necessity of love and understanding love as part of the individuation process, and that we meet our own unconscious material as we fall in love. Mm-hmm. Of course, the great task is, can we understand that that's what happens when we fall in love without executing love in the process, without killing love.
Exactly.
And that is a very delicate art.
It is.
Yes, I'm projecting this beautiful thing, and yes, I don't want to kill this beautiful thing at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So there's sort of an observing ego that could and should be part of it, that as a person is in love and has fallen, interesting choice of words in itself, that there's a part that's that can make personal meaning of it, that can observe, can be aware, rather than sort of the obliteration of ego and self-observation and just getting all caught up in the other person as if self resides in the other.
Yeah, I think I'm always careful to want to delineate a both and space. That falling in love isn't just about projection. It isn't all just an illusion and a mirage. But there is some subtle space there to make room to evaluate it critically and to think about it psychologically without wanting to undo the real miracle that it is. And so maybe it's a good thing that we're sort of talking about this right at the top, because I think that we do tend to collapse it as either, oh my God, these feelings are so overwhelming, they're truer than anything I've ever felt. This must be about this person that we're meant to be together. All truth is out there. This experience is the thing I'm seeking, versus this is just projection. Get a hold of yourself there. Mm-hmm. Oh. And there's some kind of third space that I'm always reaching for whenever I'm talking about this topic with a client.
I think your point here is just really so good and so valuable of what is the third thing, rather than either we just lose ourselves completely in our rapture, passion, or even obsession, or we just devalue it as, oh, I'm just projecting onto so-and-so. It does inspire us. It does enlarge us, and it opens our hearts in a way that is incredibly powerful. It just makes reality so much bigger and so much more full. And we get to relive a feeling so special and so unique. Gives reality a special shine.
As I'm listening to that, I'm imagining that that's the kind of experience we have when there's a mutual falling in love. But often enough, falling in love might not be reciprocated. And so it's not uncommon that one person falls in love and pursues, the other person isn't feeling it. And then one's just left with this incredible longing for union, longing to have one's heart received, longing to enter into that beautiful experience that you had detailed, Deb, but can't find the echo back that one needs in order to relax into this bliss.
Well, I don't know though, because I think that experience of I'm going to be contrary today. That experience of having those feelings evoked it does enlarge you and break you open, regardless of whether or not it's returned. Now, obviously, if it's returned, there's bliss too. But that sense of being transported into a different kind of reality that happens when we really have the full experience of falling in love with someone, where the world just, it just looks different. It's something that's happened to me a handful of times. And I can tell you that everything just glowed, and it wasn't that I was, in the throes of a full-blown mutual love affair, but it was the feelings in my heart that just made the air vibrate. And it changes you to have that experience.
It's an initiation. The first time one falls in love at whatever age, it lets us know that we're capable of feeling something that we didn't even know we could feel before.
Yeah.
And the opening of that category of being in love permanently changes us and becomes a kind of barometer by which we then compare other relationships and I think unconsciously kind of rate them in terms of how much in love I might be, how much desire that I have.
Well, what comes up for me is if it's an initiation, it can be an initiation into, something pretty difficult and dark, a real obsession and possession by an image of the other. And we see that in vampire movies where the victim, usually a female, is just swooning because she's being initiated into something, that's for sure. And it can be an initiation into a kind of transcendence, which is what I think you were talking about, Lisa, of it enlarges us, it breaks us open, and we're more than we were before.
It makes us aware that we are capable of a depth of feeling that transcends the ordinary emotional repertoire. For me, I really resonate with what a lot of other thinkers and writers have pointed to, that the love feeling that we have when we fall in love is really an aspect of divine love. There was an 11th century Sufi mystic, Ibn al-Arabi, and he says, "It is God who in each loved one manifests himself to the gaze of each lover." So that when we're falling in love, it feels like in a religious experience, because it is. Mm. And the mystics in all the great religions, there's a lot of poetry and writing and music that likens the madness for God that the mystic feels to a love affair.
And so what we're talking about here is really its archetypal reality dimension, which has a bright and a dark side both.
Yeah, it might be the air is vibrating, and it also might be this, I'm thinking of my first time falling in love, the depth of the sorrow that I felt, the depth of the heartbreak it had been unimaginable to me before. In fact, I want to tell this story. So when I was in high school, I was a senior in high school. I was taking AP English, and we read King Lear, and we had the most wonderful teacher. My fantasy about her at the time was that she had been a hippie in the 60s, and now she was this English teacher, and so she just had this wonderful, slightly countercultural vibe. So we read King Lear. She said, "What did you all think?" And I said, I don't know. I said, "I'm just not buying this. What a terrible idea to give your kingdom away to your 3 daughters. That just didn't ring true for me at all. I just don't get it. It didn't really move me at all." And a couple other people sort of chimed in, and she looked around the classroom at us, sort of horrified. And she said, "Have you never been in love?" And I mean, she was having a little fun with us, but I think she was also deadly serious. And the truth was, I couldn't even imagine what falling in love had to do with King Lear. I mean, it's not a love story, it's something else entirely. And but I couldn't imagine what she was talking about. And King Lear kind of, did not move me. Then the summer after my senior year of high school, I fell awfully, horribly in love and had my heart broken. And so just a few months later, I was rereading King Lear and weeping. I had found a new register of human emotion that had been unavailable to me before.
And that it had a universality about it, so that you could recognize the signs of that crushing, demanding love, even in literature, and literature that's hundreds and hundreds of years old.
Yes.
That there's something about human beings in love that is recognized across cultures and time.
That's just really such a wonderful and illustrative story that really points to the dimension of experience, that we have to have gone there, felt it, does go beyond words. And the heart understands things, the soul understands things in this kind of felt way that has its own singularity and its own reality, and goes back to what you were saying before. Of course, it's not only about projection. It's about us deepening and enlarging and knowing how much more we can feel, and being willing, daring to feel those things and have our hearts broken. A willingness to be vulnerable and to be open and to engage in that fantasy that we all have of something magical, something transcendent, something that we find in the other. It's a numinous experience, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Numinous because it is, as we've said many times before, archetypal. That love, I think, in its most fundamental level, is the consummation and binding of the opposites together in a bond of love. And when we fall in love with anything or anyone, that we are subjecting ourselves to a kind of binding together, which often means that we have to surrender, or we find ourselves even willingly sacrificing our preferences, what we thought was the highest priority, and allowing something that's co-created with the beloved to become a higher priority. We want to please the beloved. We want to have these new experiences with the beloved that are unprecedented. But coming back to Jung's idea of the tension of the opposites, and that being resolved by, and this is a quote from one of his alchemical texts, love that is stronger than death, a kind of magnetic dynamism between opposites that is also archetypal and universal, and that we're drawn to that despite our kind of modern sensibilities, despite all of the self-empowerment psychology that tells us we should never give ourselves away. We can't help but be part of this universal binding together with what is opposite to us.
Yeah, falling in love activates the divine in us.
And for Jung, the divine was also the devilish. That it's not the divine always in its benign sense, but the ferocity of love, as well as its kind of mystical and exultant dimensions.
And it's so mysterious, I think because it is outside the realm of ego. It is something that happens to us outside the realm of ego. I remember this when I was 18, falling in love with this person. And it was, not someone I would have ever thought I would like even. And I was just kind of walloped by it. It overtook me as it has other times that it's happened. It's quite surprising. It shows us that, our conscious ego is not in charge. This is not a good decision. This isn't a rational choice.
So in addition, I think, to the sort of the euphoria and the being captured also has along with it a feeling of anxiety or even endangerment. I think we feel both, that I'm head over heels in love and whoa, really I'm not in control of this and how's it going to end? And I think there are both of those feelings of being delighted, euphoric, and anxious, endangered. And it's exhausting. Altogether, it really is.
It reminds me of those wonderful lyrics to the Rodgers and Hart song, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. And she sort of cycles through all of these different experiences that are painful and awful and delicious and all of that.
So I feel like we've laid two categories in the room, and maybe clarifying to differentiate them, which is the kind of human dimension of falling in love, and then the spiritual and archetypal dimension that is perhaps the underlying archetype around it. And while they're blended together, I think we tend to first discover love through the physical other, and then through very hard work, we discern that there is something greater, and as you'd said, Lisa, more divine, that is calling us into this process. And so just leaning into this idea of the transcendent aspect of love first, there's something that Jung wrote about in the final section of Liber Novus, which is a bit dense, but I think it speaks very strongly to what we're talking about as the spiritual dimension and the transition from the personal to the transpersonal. He writes, I had to remain true to love and devote to it voluntarily. I suffered the dismembering and thus attained bonding with the great mother that is the stellar nature, liberation from bondage to men and things. If I am bound to men and things, I can neither go on with my life to its destination, nor can I arrive at my very own and deepest nature. Only fidelity to love and voluntary devotion to love enable this binding and mixing to be dissolved and lead me back to the part of myself that secretly lay with men and things. Only thus does the light of the star grow. Only thus do I arrive at my stellar nature, at my truest and innermost self that simply and singly is. It is difficult to remain true to love, since love stands above all sins. He who wants to remain true to love must also overcome sin. Nothing occurs more readily than failing to recognize that one is committing a sin. Overcoming sin for the sake of remaining true to love is difficult, so difficult that my feet hesitated to advance.
Mm.
And by the way, the language is very exalted and poetic, so we're all kind of trying to penetrate into what Jung might have thought. That he had to choose to be devoted to love, both as a principle and as an experience, which was difficult for him, that he had alienated himself from a certain depth of feeling, and that some insurrection was rising up in his nature and demanded that his personality prioritize the experience of love and to voluntarily surrender to it. which I think was in some ways Jung's Gethsemane moment, is that he had to choose love rather than being possessed by it. And so he writes that he suffered the dismembering and thus attained bonding with the stellar nature, which I think is what you were saying, Lisa, in that poem.
I appreciate that distinction of choosing love, but not necessarily just giving yourself over to it, that being true to it somehow and taking it very seriously without necessarily, impulsively acting on the desires that come up. It's almost like when you fall in love, it creates an ethical demand on you. What are you going to do to value and honor this very special feeling experience? And it might not mean rushing headlong into a physical affair with the person.
There's a way that I think you're pointing to in this of allowing the relationship with the other also to translate to a depth of relationship with oneself. That there is something going on between me and me, as well as between me and you, whoever that you is. And I think this goes back to what you were talking about with sort of like the mystics and that kind of love of God that's often phrased in very erotic terms. It goes back to the courtly love of the 11th and 12th centuries, where it wasn't just about sexual passion, nor was it about sort of human principle or agape, but it was about a transcendence of amour. And I think this is embedded in what you were just reading about Jung, of that a level of consciousness and an interest in how does this develop me? How does this enlarge and deepen me? As well as choosing the other, to be vulnerable and open and give oneself over to it.
Yeah, I like the point that you made, Deb, about how it's an opportunity to know ourselves more. And not just in, okay, so how do I react in this new situation? But to know our depths, our ability to feel deeply, our ability to be related to something larger than self. Aldo Cartenuto is a Jungian analyst who wrote a beautiful book called Eros and Pathos that all three of us really love. And he says, love reveals us to ourselves. A person knows his or her true nature only through falling in love. So to learn our true nature, that is quite something. That's quite a gift.
And I think what he's saying is that the state of being in love is not necessarily our true nature, but the state of being in love dredges up so much of our repressed material, so much of our personality that we don't generally bring forward or might not even know about because it hasn't been libidinized. So that love can, in some ways, bring up the worst parts of ourselves,
yes,
our
the
shadow,
messiest parts.
Yes, as well as our most self-sacrificing and noble parts of ourselves. But because the psyche is so awash with libido that it's psychoactive.
That takes me off in a direction we haven't explored yet, which is those depths of ourselves that we don't remember because we were newborns and then we were toddlers and we were young children. And our very, very first relational templates with parents and other caretaking others. And that is where we first experience love. And we start out being engulfed by another, our mother, when we're in the womb. And then we are babes in arms. And I think some of this recurs and gets, as you said, dredged up when we fall in love, some number of years later, of those primal archaic experiences that were both satisfying and frustrating and a whole host of other things. We meet them again when we fall in love.
Mm-hmm. And that does take us back to this place where, one way to think about it is we're not relating to the other through the ego or through consciousness, but we are relating to them at the unconscious level, unconscious to unconscious, or if you will, at the level of self. And that's why the interactions with the beloved feel otherworldly, numinous, uncanny, with a very different feeling tone than the kind of interactions that we might have with a friend or the barista at Starbucks.
And I think that uncanny quality is very interesting. I can think of times I have not just fallen in love, but it was a sustained, passionate meditation upon the other person. And I might suddenly have a vision of them doing something or having an experience and send a little text message asking, and lo and behold, they actually were in the middle of that moment.
Yeah.
Just as I was texting. So there is a way that we connect when we are
unconscious
focused.
to unconscious.
Yeah, on the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that fascination level, which has that uncanny quality to it, and it comes from the Latin fascinare, to charm. And that kind of usurps consciousness. I mean, one part of us is conscious, but another part is really being pulled by this feeling that we're calling uncanny, of something that I recognize but can't quite name, can't quite put my finger on. It is embodied and represented by the other.
And now we're right into the realm of anima and animus. And one of the things that we might say about falling in love from a Jungian perspective is that when we fall in love, we are projecting the contrasexual other, so either the anima or the animus, on the beloved. The anima is the sort of feminine part of a man's psyche, and the animus is the masculine part of a woman's psyche, just quickly. And the animus in the psyche of a woman exerts this pull of fascination. It is other, it is deeply attractive. And when we fall in love, we're seeing that aspect of ourselves in the beloved. So there's this question kind of going back to where we started. Is it just projection? Am I just seeing this part of myself? And of course, I'm thinking, no, it's not just anything. The Jungian analyst John Whewell has written a beautiful book called Divine Madness, Archetypes of Romantic Love. And he has a really lovely way of discussing this issue. He says that the anima or animus is a lens that brings something unknown into focus, so that we're looking at the beloved through the lens of our anima or animus. And I want to just read a short quote. He says, "Something accurate is brought into focus. The lens image suggests eyeglasses, microscopes, and telescopes. I learned to know my beloved down to her minutest detail, and I see deep into the inner space of her world. Because I see her through the intimate lens of anima, I see something that perhaps no one else has been fortunate to behold. I sometimes may see what she has never known about herself, and in my seeing, I reveal it to her, just as she discloses new vistas of my inner space. Our lenses enable us to become explorers of one another's continents and seas, and at the same time, we come to know our own."
It's lovely.
And I think it's true. I think that's a really accurate description of what happens. I mean, there is that sense of of when we are the beloved, of seeing ourselves through the eyes of the lover and seeing ourselves in a new way that we'd never known ourselves to be capable of being in the world, or loving someone so much and having other people say, I just can't, what is it you see in him, or what is it you see in her?
I suspect what we see in the person we've fallen in love with is an aspect of wholeness. The other's wholeness, that we do project it, but we also see it and intuit it in the other. The togetherness of exploring one another's seas and seeing ourselves more whole. And then the new whole, that is the third thing created by two people who are in love. I think this goes to what you said before about, an aspect of the divine, but there is a wholeness that just lights us up. We feel unique and special and whole, and we see it out there in our beloved, and together we create a new whole.
I certainly think that is the pattern that drives the magnetism between the lover and the beloved, this promise of wholeness or a glimpse of wholeness.
Yeah.
And that it's so overwhelmingly appealing that we're willing to undergo all kinds of changes in order to approach that, in order to have the opportunity to attain it. And then, of course, as happens, we realize that it isn't possible to have a complete merger with another person or any object, person, circumstance that is outside of our own psychology. That while the other person may be worthy and appropriate of all of our love, the transformative wholeness that we're craving ultimately does happen internally.
Mm-hmm.
What I think you're starting to point to, Joseph, is that this state of glory and magic and, all the rest of it doesn't last. It just can't last. And I think I feel a little bit like a wet blanket, but I think it's just also human truth, and we all know it. But that it can then lead to real intimacy. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, but that it grows into something where there's a separation of recognizing the other as a unique, separate, different person, and being able to value, honor, and love the differences after we emerge from the merger state, and bringing consciousness and intentionality and hopefully, at least in my view, commitment as a lifelong trajectory to the original passion and in love state.
And this maybe goes back to what I started off with, that we don't so much overvalue it as value it incorrectly. I'm thinking back to the song I mentioned earlier, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, because it's so clever, because in the opening stanzas, she's falling in love. She says, I'm wild again, beguiled again, a simpering, whimpering child again, bewitched, bothered, and bewildered am I. And then by the end, it says, wise at last, my eyes at last are cutting you down to your size at last, bewitched, bothered, and bewildered no more. So it sort of happens, and then it goes away. And sometimes it happens and it goes away. Sometimes it happens and it grows into an enduring love that becomes a mature partnership. But for my money, psychologically, what I'm really hoping we can make room to do is to take this tremendous experience of falling in love, and then regardless of what happens later, know that was an incredibly valuable experience, and we can live differently, having been changed by it, having known that place honoring it without necessarily acting it out, without devaluing it when the limerence fades, knowing that we were granted a true vision of the divine realm, as it were, without letting our disappointment that it didn't turn into something concrete make us jejune about it.
I think that's quite right. That the other is a representative of the unconscious and of a particularly exquisite aspect of our own unconscious life. And that once we have brushed against that through projection, we still have gained something. We've benefited from something that we didn't know before.
Yes.
If we can internalize it in the right way, it's still a kind of holy gift.
Yes.
And let's just say we fall into even perhaps what could be a cynical attitude, saying it's just projection. But I think when I hear people say it's just projection, I think that they don't understand the profound value of projection.
Yeah.
That whatever it is that you think is indescribably exquisite about the beloved is indescribably exquisite in you. To be able to share the locus of what's extraordinary so that it's in you and it's in the other person allows us to also fall in love with something that is inside of ourselves. And perhaps if we can understand it in the right way, develop a determination to foster both the inner and outer relationship, not to try to tear something from the beloved, but to share something with the beloved. And over time, as we achieve that self-knowledge, something does soften in the relationship, and it can go from being an overwhelming passion to an erotic friendliness over time that allows us to have several dimensions of all of this simultaneously.
Yeah, I've mentioned 2 books, but Joseph, listening to what you said, 2 more important ones come to mind. One is Impossible Love, Why the Heart Must Go Wrong by Jungian analyst Jan Bauer. It's just so beautiful and brilliant. I love that book. And also The Eden Project by James Hollis. And both of those books go into a little bit more like, so what do we do with this? One of the things when someone has fallen in love and is trying to sort it out with me in analysis, I'll sometimes say, what are you most jealous of about the beloved? Which seems like a funny question to a lot of people, but then they think about it and they can say, I just wish that I could play music like he can. And it's like, well, maybe that's something to think about. Maybe there's something in you that is longing to be met, that's longing to be cultivated. You've met it out there in the world and fallen in love with it. And maybe you're being called to fall in love with that within yourself.
That goes to that wonderful category of golden shadow, of positive potential that we can find so exquisite in another person that has some kind of a seed correlate in our own soul. And we may never become concertizing musicians like our beloved may be, but we can find some part of that which is also luminous in our own lives. I'm also thinking about how the falling in love, the romantic love, softens over time. And when Jung was talking with Esther Harding these many, many years ago about falling in love and out of love and all the different permutations of friendships that can happen, he confided in her that after all of the churning and alchemical work and the heating and cooling and dismembering comes to a stable place, in the best situation, he began to feel that there was an invisible telegraph wire between him and another person, which he personally called his golden thread. That there was a kind of symbolic friendship, or sometimes in a really dry way, he would call it kinship libido. But there was actually a kind of organ that developed between him and the other person, where there was a constant, subtle communication with the beloved that transcended the wild passion of romantic love, that allowed him to still surrender to love as a form of communication versus a form of idealization. And he suggested to Harding that that was something to aspire to.
I think in an effort to sort of bring this into a closing circle, what we're talking about is how intrinsically, deeply, valuably human love is. From just the earliest first day of our life on this planet, how incredibly important the other is to us. And it takes all kinds of shapes and forms. So we talked really about attachment and initiation and being engulfed by love and courtly love and our inner other as the anima or animus. But I wonder if what it comes down to is whether we let love enlarge us and whether we can learn from it, or whether somehow it takes us over in ways that don't make us bigger, deeper, warmer. Love ultimately should make us more loving.
And maybe with that we can transition to a dream. Hey Lisa, what's been going on about your book?
Well, it was released on May 25th and sales have been strong, and I've been receiving so many lovely emails and texts and phone calls from friends and from people that I don't know telling me how much they've enjoyed the book, and so that feels really great. The reviews on Amazon have all been glowing, and that's been really heartening. It's just really wonderful to know that this project of mine is resonating with so many people.
I'm just so happy for you, and it's such a lovely, lovely book, both deep and accessible, about the inner journey around being a mother. That's never been written about. It hasn't been out there. And that it's getting such an enthusiastic, heartfelt reception. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I would love it if listeners who've read the book could write a review on Amazon, because although there are many wonderful ones there, more is always better. So thanks in advance for that.
You've really incarnated something that was in the ethers, but needed to be pulled down, needed to be shaped in words, and needed to be made accessible. And proof in the pudding is that it's beginning to have a kind of life of its own in the collective.
Yes.
That speaks a lot to the timeliness of this.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joseph.
The analogy to a baby is just too rich and too good and too multifaceted to be missed. It's having a life of its own, which is just what we want.
That's right.
Today our dreamer is a 27-year-old male who works as an expert assembler at a jewelry making business. And here's the dream. I'm looking at myself in a mirror in my waking life bathroom. I lean close and notice that my two upper front teeth appear to be loose and crooked. I touch one and it skews out of alignment. I panic. I try to realign the tooth, and it falls out with a gush of blood. I touch my other tooth, and it too falls out. I hold the teeth in shaking hands as I try to fit them back into place. They won't stay in. I'm horrified and unable to do anything. The teeth seem to grow larger in my hands, looking more like an animal tooth, like a sea lion's canine tooth I have in my waking life. I wake suddenly with an intense urge to check my teeth to make sure they're all still there and okay. He gives us a bit of context and writes, "My partner and I have recently decided to change direction in our life. We've been feeling like we're treading water waiting for life to happen. I'm now planning on going back to school to pursue a passion that I had previously given up on. We're also planning to move away from where we currently live." The feelings in the dream were panic, horror, anxiety, and a feeling that I shouldn't have done that. And he adds, "I have an intense anxiety disorder and suffer from grinding teeth during my sleep." So I'm just going to jump in with an idea. At first, when I was reading the dream, I was thinking about how common teeth dreams are. People frequently dream that their teeth are crumbling or have exploded out of their mouth, they're falling out. So analysts over the years have speculated any number of different possible meanings around it. But as I was looking at the context that they've decided to take their lives in hand and no longer wait for stuff to happen, but to really go forward and make things happen for them, I was thinking about how we lose our baby teeth. And so when I think about him coming into the mirror and seeing that the teeth are crooked and they're loose and they kind of pop out, and while his adult masculine ego doesn't think of himself as a kid losing his baby teeth, there is something about living a slightly provisional life which is kind of young, and the decision to take himself in hand as a maturational decision. The fact that the dream is showing the old teeth, the baby teeth falling out, in preparation for something adult, stronger, larger, more substantive to grow in, seems relevant to his context. And that it's also going to take some time. If we remember losing our baby teeth, or we've seen a baby lose their teeth, that's just they're in the middle of a process of transformation. And I'm wondering if perhaps the dream is suggesting that.
That's really interesting, Joseph. And it fits this idea that it's kind of out of alignment, and he kind of puts it back, because it's like that when you have a loose tooth, it's like it's wiggling and it doesn't, God, it's an uncomfortable feeling. It's like, wait, it's not supposed to be like that.
I thought basically, Joseph, that you just took this whole dream, wrapped it up, tied it neatly with a bow. It feels right to me, and I also really like the trajectory or the telos of embarking on a change in direction of life, going back to school. Things are up in the air. It is anxiety producing. There's a betweenness that I think, we see it with kids all the time, where for a while they don't have a couple of their teeth, and it's disconcerting. And it is in the interest, of course, of their growth and development.
Yeah, even he says, I hold the teeth in shaking hands as I try to fit them back into place. It feels a little bit like regressive restoration of the persona. Like I want to go back the way it was.
Put it back.
But then the teeth in his hand grow larger until one seems like this very significant canine tooth, which is, the canines are really in animals for attack, for defense, as well as for really ripping things off. So that's really an image of aggression, and it's his aggression, his aggressive capacity is kind of growing in the image of this tooth.
And teeth are inherently aggressive. We bite, we chomp, we chew. It's the beginning of the digestive process. And yet it's a little disconcerting when we sort of aggressively pursue a new direction in life. I think there's part of us that goes, oh my God, what am I doing?
And particularly if we've been living a kind of quiet life, or perhaps not a fully actualized life, the magnitude of stepping into who we really are can leave us kind of shaking, can leave us in a bit of a panic.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, there seems to be a natural process in the dream that he can't go backwards on. He tries to fit the teeth back into place and he realizes, I'm unable to do anything. And just as you said, Lisa, he can't regress. He can't let things stay the way they used to be, the way that's familiar. He's got to let this casting off process happen in order to make room for the new teeth, the new ideas, the new attitude to grow out of the structure, the bony structure in the soul.
It's really wonderful because the dream ego, of course, is just absolutely horrified at this and isn't seeing what you just pointed out, Joseph, which is making room for something new to grow.
Yeah, and of course, I'm noting that the streamer is 27, which is this age where many people step into, I want to say, full adulthood. The 27, 28, the kind of age 30 transition that we've spoken about before on the podcast, of course.
The energy around our destiny is numinous, it's big, it's awe-filled. And when we come up against our internal destiny, it can horrify us because we sense the demands that it will make upon us. And I have the feeling that he's right there, and very encouragingly has chosen to go towards his destiny rather than trying to evade it. At which point then the destiny becomes a dragon that's hunting you. And many of us, many people have lived that life for a long time, being hunted by their destiny, and things don't tend to work out very well.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.